So in this chapter, we're going to talk about maximizing the head cut and removing the osteophytes. It's important in order to see the glenoid to remove as much humeral bone as you can. In this particular case, I'm performing a reverse shoulder arthroplasty. My preference is to use an external guide to make the head cut. Certainly an intramedullary guide is another option. I first pin the external guide in place. It's important when performing a total shoulder arthroplasty not to violate the rotator cuff. So for that reason, making a head cut that doesn't violate the tendons is of critical importance. It's always better to undercut than to overcut in that case, because you can correct the cut later, and we'll talk about that shortly. Once I've removed the head, I can remove the guide and work on the proximal humerus. At this point, it's important to have the patient with the arm completely free. My preference is to use a padded Mayo as opposed to a pneumatic arm holder or battery-powered arm holder. The reason I do that is I have more freedom of motion of the arm. Adducting and extending the arm is important to expose the proximal humerus to complete these portions of the procedure. With the patient in the beach chair position, it's important to be able to extend and adduct the arm for maximum proximal humerus exposure. In order to do that, my choice is to keep the arm free on a padded Mayo as opposed to using a battery-powered or pneumatic arm holder. This allows me maximum range of motion of the arm. I keep the Mayo lowered when I'm working on the humeral side, and I raise the Mayo to take tension off the deltoid when I'm working on the glenoid side. So in this case, I've got the Mayo lowered, I've got the arm extended and adducted. Once you've made your preliminary head cut, it's important to use a ronger and remove all of the osteophytes from the anterior, inferior, and posterior portions of the proximal humerus. Removing the posterior osteophytes allows greater excursion of the humeral head, improving your exposure. So once I've made my preliminary head cut, I use a canal finder to locate the canal. You can then sequentially ream up to your maximum reamer size. Once I've obtained some chatter, that's when I stop. It's important to not press fit your component into the diaphysis, because that can lead to stress yielding. Metaphyseal fit is much more important in cases of shoulder arthroplasty. Once I've identified my distal canal size, I begin with broaching. I like to underbroach by 2 sizes from the reamer that I found to be the largest size. In cases of poor bone, my personal preference is to stop with a broach that's 2 sizes less than the line-to-line. Using the broach, I can correct my cut in a variety of ways. So I can correct my version. The broach will auto-correct varus valgus as it finds the canal, and I can also correct my depth. Again, as mentioned before, you don't want to get into your rotator cuff. So by countersinking the broach, I can then use a calcar planer to correct all 3 of those at once in one quick and easy step. So in this chapter, we have made our head cut. We've maximized the head cut by using the broach and the calcar planer. At the same time, we've corrected our version along with our varus and our valgus. And we've removed all of the osteophytes off of the anterior, inferior, and posterior aspect of the glenoid, all of which will improve the mobility of your humerus and improve the exposure of your glenoid. So in this chapter, we've talked about maximizing your humeral preparation to improve your exposure. You notice to this point, all we've talked about are various techniques to improve glenoid exposure by working on the humeral side. Next, we're going to move on to the glenoid side.